初めは全く喋れませんでした。でもこういう方法を使ってこんなに何十カ国語も喋れるようになりましたっていうのが売りじゃん、そういう人たちって。
Welcome to the lazyfluency podcast, where we have casual conversations switching between English and Japanese so that you can learn from and with us along the way. I'm Joey.
And I'm Miami.
And the topic of the day is polyglots. Before we get into that, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and or drop a review on the platform you're listening on. We appreciate the support. And with that out of the way, polyglots. If you are listening to this podcast, then you are most likely pretty invested in the language learning space, which means you have also most likely encountered polyglots, master language learners who can speak any language after a week or two of practice. But are polyglots really real? And what does it actually take to become one? But before we actually get into that, for the second time, congratulations to us. This is our 100th episode, and we are dressed up for this episode as, well, I don't know. You can see our tops at the very least. Whether we are wearing dress pants or not, that is a whole separate conversation. It is, we're filming this in a kotatsu, and let's just say I'm too scared about my dress pants ripping.
Too lazy.
But I've not confirmed that whether or not we're wearing dress pants. With that said, thank you for everybody who's listened this far. We'll talk more about 100 episode stuff later. But polyglots. I think before this episode, I asked you what a polyglot was, and you gave me a huh? Is that because just the English polyglot word, or do you have any experience seeing like social media or other stuff from polyglots?
まずpolyglots っていう単語はまず聞いたことなくて、で、それを聞いたら、マルチリンガルと一緒なのかな、意味的には。
Normally, the distinction in English is basically like if you can speak 4 more languages, and speak is very vague, we'll talk about that later, then you can be qualified as a polyglot. Polyglot can't even speak English. So
ゼロカ国語話者。
Yeah, I mean, just a quick note, I do remember a Japanese friend I have who lived kind of half and half his life in the US and Japan, and he actually made a comment like that where when you're a native speaker, you get held up to the standard of a native speaker. And so he said, well, for me, because I've lived in both, I'm held up to the standards of native speakers on both. So from my American friends, I can't speak English. From my Japanese friends, I can't speak Japanese. So some people can say I can speak 2 languages, and I say I can't speak any. But anyways, have you any experience seeing this content in Japanese? I've seen it for English, look how awesome my English is, but I don't think I've actually seen the Japanese equivalent of look how many languages I can speak.
あるよ。で、よくあるのが、世の中の、お母さんがね、自分の小さい子供を、マルチリンガルに育てようということで、いろんなね、英会話教室であったり、家でできる、ディズニーの、コンテンツを使った、言語の、DVD か CD かわかんないけど、それを使って、自分の子供をマルチリンガルに育てようという人が結構いて、で、よくたまにっていうのもおかしいけど、たまにYouTube であったり、Instagram であったりっていうところで、うちの子供はこれだけ喋れるんだ、みたいな。10カ国語喋れる娘の、インタビュー撮影しました、みたいな、そういうのがあって、でもやってる内容っていうのは、もう覚えれば言えそうなフレーズばっかなんだよ。例えばさ、10カ国語の、こんにちはを小学生の娘が言ってみたみたいな。そんなのさ、覚えればさ、言えるじゃん。私だって、中国語でニーハオとかさ、もうスペイン語でオラだっけ？
そう。
そういうのとかも全部さ、合わせたらね、10カ国語は多分普通に行くと思うよ。だから、それで、10カ国語私喋れますっていうのもおかしいなっていうのはちょっと思ってるけど、多分それで、私、何カ国語喋れますよって言ってる人は、いるっちゃいると思うんだよね。その程度で何カ国語喋れますって言ってる人が。
Yeah, this is actually kind of very definition-centric portion that I want to start this episode out on. And I've not looked into the history of this, but I have some assertions. Maybe I should have looked in more depth into the history of this. But for me, the whole notion of being a polyglot seems like a very, very American thing to talk about, or for even to be impressive in the first place. Not only are for many, especially in Africa, it is just normal for being able to speak many other languages, and it's not like something that you need to, put all this like pride in your personal image to and like gloat about, or what I call it performative language learning, which I think has become the US. But in Europe, it's so common. You're learning basically by default, you're learning 3. And if you learn 1 because you're interested, you're a polyglot. There you go. And so I guess right off the bat, there's a lot of ambiguity in the definition, and the definition itself, or this designation of being a polyglot, from my understand, is a fairly recent thing. Like my quick take on it, because there's a bunch of aspects I want to talk about, is I get the idea that the fact that social media and YouTube, a lot of it, I guess the influence of America is so large that the expectations of what makes you socially, gives you more social status in America, tends to take up a lot more of like the space in any given entertainment, including YouTube and including the language learning space, where for many people, just existing passively would make them a polyglot, and it's not something that really makes you any better or worse than anybody else. But from the American perspective, where everybody only speaks one language, it's suddenly impressive that you can communicate in more than one. And then it also gives this whole other, the majority of I think Americans don't really even comprehend how it is possible to speak 2 languages, if I'm being frank.
いや、それね、日本の方がひどいと思うよ。だってアメリカの方がまださ、いろんな国の人が多いじゃん。例えばスペイン語をさ、話せる人って結構いるじゃん。でも日本ってさ、それを考えたらさ、もう単一民族だし、喋ってる、言語も日本語がほぼだから、それ考えたら日本のが、worse だよ。
No, I agree with you on that aspect. I'm specifically talking about what I believe to be the largest overrepresentation in most cultural aspects, which is people who are Americans who their parents both speak English at home. More specifically, which primarily is white Americans, but not always exclusively. In my case, which is, I guess you could say, half white American, I'm not speaking about, obviously, mixed race, or I guess by proxy, directly myself, because obviously my mom is a Panamanian. So I guess I'm comparing the Japanese people to the speaking English at home, both, native English-speaking parents. In that comparison. But I do agree with you that there is obviously Japanese people way more homogenous, and so because of that, it also can be desirable to speak another language, but also people don't understand how you can speak another language. But what I would say is that in Japan's case, you have an expressed need, or I guess an assumed need, because everybody's like, oh, you need to know English. The government says you need to know English. Whereas there's one more aspect of America that I think makes it very interesting, is not only is there obviously people Americans who only speak English and have English parents, or people who native speak English like at home. But on top of that, for a lot of Americans, it's not perceived as being a need. So there's not even an idea, aside from maybe being forced to go into Spanish class, that learning a language is at all practical. Like it's 0% practical for a lot of people. And so that's why I think for polyglots, I think a big thing about it is a flex. It's like back in the day when you hear like, oh, the king is always fat, which not a good thing. Back in the day, it shows you have excess money to spare. And so to me, memorizing languages, especially, and I noticed a huge amount of the field, I would say, was white Americans all across all YouTube. Think about it, guys. Think about whether it be Japanese or other languages. Is it a white American who is very popular on YouTube? Because the vast majority of them are. Let's just be real here. I think it's seen as something you're doing out of, you're like, I am so privileged that I can do this for fun and it doesn't even benefit me. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to in most other countries where you explicitly have to learn English, or you need to learn 3-4 languages because that's what people do and happens all around you.
なんか似たような話、あれだよね。日本語を勉強したい国はどこかみたいなのも、なんか世界のマップでさ、確か、英語圏がさ、多いというのって、やったやつのと似てるよね。だからそれ、趣味で、趣味で言語を、勉強できるっていうので、日本語って絶対practical じゃないじゃん。日本でしか話せないから。で、そんな日本語を、勉強しようとしてるのは、やっぱり趣味でそういうことをできる、英語圏の人たちだよね、みたいな。やったやん。
Yes, we talked about it a little before. I'm just putting this pretext into discussion of polyglots in general, because I guess there's something I want to talk about before we're I guess about to jump into, do polyglots exist? How many, exist? Or what does it mean to be a polyglot? But before that, I kind of want to discuss, I really don't even think the designation of polyglot really even matters or is relevant or means anything. And I think it primarily only even the word itself almost implies a level of status attributed to something that I don't think intrinsically matters, honestly. It's like a party trick, being honest. Obviously, it's not a party trick to the individual, but a lot of the performance, and I feel like a lot of the content around it is all about not convincing, not about communication with other people, especially who speak the native language. It's about convincing other people, specifically ones who don't speak any other languages, Americans, primarily other, English-speaking countries, Australia, places, Britain, convincing them that you're better than them in a subtle way, or making them feel like they're dumb or whatever, with the I learned X language in X, or especially Japanese. I did JLPT N1 in 1 month, JLPT N1 in 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
Literally, or the amount of people who try to do the Asian trifecta, East Asian trifecta, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese at the same time. And for whatever reason, other than I cannot imagine anything like that being intrinsically motivated, other than just trying to be able to say, oh, I speak Korean. They're hard. I've heard they're hard. So yeah, as to actual polyglots, there is a list of some very notable polyglots, and I think we can use this as a way to transition in discussion of what it actually means to be a polyglot and actually what it means to learn a language. But do you want to list some of these famous polyglots and how many languages they can supposedly speak?
なんか面白いのがさ、このポリグロッツがどれだけ話してんのかなと思って。まあせいぜい、20ぐらいじゃないとか思ってたら、もうその想像を超える、数で、なんかすごいのはさ、42カ国語っていうのもあって、その人通訳者なんだけどね。ポエル・ジャヌマス。誰だで、他も50カ国語以上とかね、で、なんか、シュー・ジョンソン・ボーリングっていう人がさ、100カ国語を話し、200カ国語に、精通していて、その人の職業が知事って何て言うんだ、メイヤーか。作家、あと学者って書いてあるんだけど、このさ、100カ国語を話し、200カ国語に精通ってさ、絶対嘘っていうか、なんて言うんだろう。それこそさ、ハローぐらいしか言えないんじゃないかって思うんだけどさ、ねえ。そんな、多分日常会話のレベルではないと思うよ。
I don't know any of these guys specifically, but this is the first thing I guess I want to mention, which is in the polyglot discussion, which is part of its vague definition, is this idea of speaking. And I'm not trying to be the speaking police, but when something I feel is done for very, is intrinsically performative, or, your whole content or money is being made around selling an idea, in which case that, language learning is trivially easy, or I'm especially gifted. Then I feel like the conversation of what speaking actually means comes into play. And I feel like one of the first things that you'd be clear, especially for those who are just starting learning Japanese, and for some reason, I guess listening to the podcast, good job, that all languages are obviously not only contextual within a given time period, but also or within your given generation, but also very, contextual within given subjects. And then even then there, there's so much incredible nuance to what, whether it be language speaking abilities, which was conveying your ideas in a specific culture. I think we talked about it before, where you could theoretically have somebody speak perfect Japanese, or you're talking about earlier, whether you're having the AI conversation. I think this was our last episode. But your understanding of the culture also plays a role in there. And so fundamentally, I don't believe that obviously I think there's plenty of people who probably have a very basic or maybe very good phonetic acquisition. They can have very good ear and they can mimic languages. But at the end of the day, languages ultimately to speak, you need to know tens of thousands of words and not only know them a little bit, but know them very thoroughly to be considered, if you want to be if we're comparing native level fluency or anything even close to that. And on a feasibility, just feasibility perspective, I do not think it is even possible, to let's say I don't know what the exact line is, but we're nowhere near. I definitely would probably say 10 might even be the limit. If you spent every decade of your life mastering a language, maybe until you died, I could see that. And then maybe you started with one, or three when you were a kid and had this massive exposure. But I'm very skeptical that And the reason another reason I'm skeptical is although languages aren't 100% a use it or you lose it because you always have those connections, if the connections aren't tread on, then it will definitely not be in your head at any time. So I don't think there's even a possibility that you meet someone who's on point with all their languages that at their peak at any given time, such that they feel like you're talking to a native person over and over and over and over again. So off the bat, I guess, do you have any thoughts on when you see these like ridiculous numbers, or have you met anybody who like in your life you're like, wow, this person, to your knowledge, like natively speaks 15 languages?
いや、そもそもみんなモノリンガルだからあんまりそういうのはあったことないけど、まあ、インターネットで、まあ、ちっちゃい子がちょっとずつ喋れますよっていうのしか見たことはない。
And do you, wait, so this was, online? Okay. I guess out of your friends, you're probably the person who can speak the most languages because you have some experience with Taiwanese as well, right?
Yeah, I can speak 3 languages, technically, including, a little bit of Taiwanese もね、入れると。
Wait. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, I thought it was 4. I'm like, wait, is there another language that you've been studying that I'm unaware of? And I guess, yeah, this is going back into my discussion of the target audience thing, which is this designation of even talking about how good someone's speaking is, and why I feel like one of the ways it can be very counterproductive is I do not like discouraging learners. I feel like the whole idea of how well you can speak before you can say you're fluent is very non-productive. But at the same time, there is a level of transparency that I believe is like you should have as someone who is like making content explicitly for language learners, and especially those for a lot of Americans who've never learned a language before. And so I'm not talking about any of these guys specifically. Maybe John Bull II was some incredible genius, and every time he learned a word, it went directly to his memory or his brain and never left it. And he knew 200 languages with maximum fluency.
それ、その人さ、なんだ、言葉を絶対忘れないって今言ってたじゃん。で、fluent なんで、fluent なんでしょ？それってなんか言葉を覚えてられるからって言って、フルーエントかどうかってそこ直結しないと思うんだけど。
Yes, but you do need an understanding of vocabulary.
は必要だよね。
That's my point. I'm saying so that
vocabulary なんていうんだそれさなんか苦手だな。必要十分条件。十分だけど必要だけど十分条件ではないよねっていう。ちょっとごめん、難しいから、ちょっとなんでもないけど、そのイコールにはならないと思う。その、いっぱいボキャブラリーがあるからって言って、めちゃめちゃ喋れるっていう人は、限られる気がする。だから日本人だってさ、なんだ、英検1級とか、なんだ、TOEIC 満点だからって言って、なんか、それこそ、英検、3級の人より喋れないとこ普通にあるし、でもそういう人たちってさ、ボキャブラリーすごいんだよ。もうなんか、普段聞かないような、言葉も知ってるぐらい、語彙はあるんだけど、でもそれが喋れるっていうことにつながってないからね。
Well, I mean, it's connected, definitely. It's connected, but it's not
perfectly.
Yeah, they're not one-to-one, obviously. If it wasn't connected, then I don't understand how languages work. I don't actually know the words I'm saying, but I'm just speaking. I do want to talk about a general subject, though, which is, do you think polyglots, or I'm going to extend this to language learning content in general. What do you think the goal is? And do you think it has like a positive or negative effect on language learning? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first. Like content being made around language learning, let's say specifically, let's start with polyglot content. Do you think it has a positive or negative impact on like language learning, like the communities for people learning? Do you think like the person, the content for people saying I learned, let's say, like 5-6 languages, I know 20 languages, look at me speaking. Do you think they have they have a positive influence on the language learning community?
少なくともね、ちょっとこう、ポジティブではあるじゃないなんか、で、そういう人って大体さ、私ははじめは全く喋れませんでした。でもこういう方法を使って、こんなに何十カ国語も喋れるようになりましたっていうのが売りじゃん、そういう人たちって。でさ、少なからず何かしらのテクニック、コツっていうのがあって、その何十カ国も喋れるようになりましたっていうのが、あるあるじゃん。 で、そういう、まあ、簡単にできて、なんていうんだ。簡単にすぐ、習得できるやつってさ、みんな、まあ、知りたいじゃん。ね。そんなね、人間なんか楽して手に入るものあればさ、すぐ手にしたいものだからさ。だから、まあ、そういう、なんていうんだろう。方法が、まあ、あれば、まあ、それはまあ、ポジティブじゃん。それが成功しようが成功しないが、いいものであろうが、いいものじゃなかろうが、まあ、少なくとも、なんて言うんだろう。そういう、まあ、言語学習者に、その言語を、学ぶ機会を与えてるっていうか。ので、まあ、ポジティブではあるんじゃない？
I think I would 99% disagree with a 1% agreement potentially. In that the 1% agreement would be something along the lines of someone who just likes language learning for the sake of language learning, and other people who like language learning for the sake of language learning, and they can be in their little circle of liking language learning for the sake of language learning, and maybe they're encouraging each other. For the 99% of other cases, I do not think it is a positive thing. I think the whole reason that it had those like videos have any popularity is around the idea, especially I feel like really the American perspective and like a lot of people consuming it is, wow, look how impressive this person is. Wow, look how cool this person. I wish I could be that. Like, dude, everybody's had the thought, and it's in so many movies, like you can understand or speak any language. Like if you're auto translating, and I feel like. And the other thing about it, I feel is very shallow, is not only does it make languages, I feel like, or just really oversimplify what it means to be fluent and the experience of language learners into this weird, like, gamification thing, which it feels absurd, and drastically overemphasize how much it really takes to be fluent. But I also feel like it doesn't really give... for me, what I feel like the most important stuff about language is not the language, but the culture and the people that makes the language worth speaking. And it does not put that first. And so I don't know if this is like a content philosophy thing, but for me, the goal of, like, you were talking about language learning content in general, I heard, like, for example, some people might be thinking, I guess maybe I'll ask you a question. When you were learning English, do you feel, or, there's like a lot of, English publications, big, hey, here's a quick, grammar tip, or here's, daily facts or anything about English. What do you think the role of like those, the full, dedicated English learning, YouTube channels or other stuff are? Do you think, and how effective do you think you are or for those like content for actually helping people learn the language?
なんか、まあ今ってさ、そのインスタだったり、まあ YouTube だったり、なんかショートね、とかで、まあ、1分ぐらいのさ、コンテンツっていうのが今、すごい流行ってるじゃん。で、なんか、ネイティブならこう言うとかっていうコンテンツを結構やってる人たちがいて、まあそれはまあ、短い文で、ネイティブってこう言うんだみたいな、こういう言い方の方がなんかナチュラルなんだとか、結構あるから、なんか、まあ、なんて言うんだろう。すぐに、まあそういうネイティブの英語にリーチできるっていうので、なんか、まあ、面白いとは思うよ。
面白い but I'm saying, do you think that they actually help people learn faster?
まあ、faster かどうかわかんないけど。
Okay, more efficient. Are they helping somebody learn languages?
まあ、helping はまあ、そうじゃない。だって、なんか、私が知ってるやつでは、そのコンテンツやってる人がね、確かね、なんか、ネイティブなら、こう言うって言って、そのフレーズをやって、で、映画とかドラマで、フレーズがね、使われてるシーンとかを流して、こうやって言う方が自然だよとか、こういう状況の時にこれを使うと、こういう意味だよっていうのを紹介してて、まあ、便利っていうか、まあ、役に立ってると思うけど。
I guess in my opinion, I would say that the vast majority of content probably gives no real benefit to someone's actually learning journey, but I do think that if the goal of the content, I know for a lot of these content, I know just to make money, but let's assume that that's not always the case. I mean, actually, it always is the case for a lot of them, especially a lot of the most popular ones, just being real. Maybe not initially, but over time, whatever. But I would say that I think the main benefit that's being done is creating like a sense of community around the language and feeling like other people are learning it as like a motivation factor. But I feel like with our app conversation that we were having last time, that a lot of these like, I follow, because this is a comment I also get as well, which is, I saw a little clip or something from Japanese. Like I remember somebody told me, like, I wasn't able to, engage with like Japanese this week, but I did see a tweet in Japanese. And I was like, that is great. That is engagement. But we'll talk about, I guess, maybe I'll get to this, a comment that was made on this last week's episode today. But I really feel a lot of those things, if that's become somebody's main thing, they're barely getting any degree of like input that they actually should be getting if they actually want to engage a language. Or for example, saying something like, this is what native people actually say, I feel like has really small actual benefit outside of helping people at the maybe the best case scenario. It helps people open up to listening more carefully when they're actually engaged with the language. But I feel like the real benefit is creating a sense of community, or maybe getting people interested in the language,
まあ、それもあるよ。それもあるけど、私普通に便利だと思うよ。なんでかっていうと、昨日面白い会話があって、バーベキュー行ったんだよ。知らない人と、友達とね。で、その中での会話で、お腹いっぱいって聞かれた時に、いっぱいじゃないっていうのか、他の言い方があるのかみたいな話になって、日本人っていっぱいじゃないって言わないんだよね。お腹いっぱいじゃないって言わないんだよ。日本人は、全然とかだったり、まだとか、お腹まだいけるとか言うんだけど、お腹いっぱいじゃないとは言わないんだよ。だからそれってさ、やっぱりネイティブの人がしか知らないじゃん。そういうニュアンス的なのって。絶対に教科書で書いてないし。っていうのもあるからさ、そういうネイティブしか知らないようなことを、発信したり、こういうネイティブならこう言うよっていうのを発信してる人は、普通に、ベネフィシャルだし、ユースフルであると思う。
I think our disagreement is coming from, I'm not saying that the information does not exist. I'm saying if the goal is to, I think there's a difference. Like, a teacher can say words, but it's a different thing to actually teach. Or a teacher can teach, but it's a different thing for a student to learn. Whereas I'm saying I do not believe any actual learning is really happening, because I believe that learning is happening through repetition, from them hearing it over and over again, not from one time somebody saying a video, well, this is what you should be saying. Because even if they mimic that one thing, the rest won't connect. And so that's kind of where I'm saying a lot of the various small shorts I don't think have really direct benefits outside of creating a sense of community, which I think is very important, because ultimately I would say for I have, obviously a main channel, although, I'm way too slow at making content. How I view it, well, honestly, I initially with the channel when we were making it, my first video was something I just very wanted to make, I just really wanted to make. And then, I guess for a little bit I was unsure what kind of content I make, and I feel like I finally am starting to figure it out. But fundamentally, my goal is to share why I'm actually, there's a lot of language stuff, sort of, and there might be more coming. But from my perspective it is really, I don't really care that much if somebody actually learns that much from any given video I make. I care more that they at least can see why the subject itself is very interesting, or at least interesting to me, and that passion can hopefully, bring more people or make, people more interested in the language. Because I think fundamentally that's the only role that content really serves, unless your content is obviously just Japanese language content. Or for our, the whole reason this podcast has both languages is, I've talked about it multiple times, but I guess one aspect was I talked about it that, for people who are still intermediate, so they can listen to English and Japanese and not feel, exhausted and can actually understand something. But the other reason, more specifically, was I just didn't find a lot of Japanese podcasts to be very entertaining. And I'm not saying that we are entertaining, generally speaking.
めっちゃ、あれじゃん。なんだっけ、ナルシストっていうか、アロガントに聞こえる。
No, I found a lot of content to be entertaining. I'm just saying I didn't find Japanese podcasts to be entertaining. And just a quick aside, I finally found a Japanese YouTube video series I found was actually funny. It's called, Aimi showed it to me, it's called Jinnai. He's a comedian. So there you go. I'm not against Japanese, I'm not against Japanese content wholesale. But my point is that I feel like the main goal I have and why, like with most our content episode, is the conversation itself hopefully is entertaining regardless of the language. And that entertainment is, like, to me, is actually one of the most important things in language learning. Like, if you're focusing heavily on the language over why the learner should even care to interact with the language in the first place, to me, it's like either you're, maybe you're doing some linguistic publication, or I don't know who your direct audience is, maybe the linguists who like linguistics. But for me, like, language is intrinsically not about the language, but about what you actually can gain access to with the language. And so I feel like that's why a lot of my content is about, I think this is a question that I get from sometimes, like, why, I think book criticism I had is like, oh wow, all the books, like, how do you get cheap manga? First, no Japanese. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. I'm trying to show that there's a benefit to learning the language. You actually get benefits, you have access to Book Off, you have access to Japanese escape rooms, and other stuff that I have down the line. The last thing I should say is, I have a question written down here that word, should you learn another language? I mean, I don't know if you have opinions on this. I have thoughts. This is a very open question, but do you think, should someone learn another language? And if they should, why?
まあ少なくとも日本人は英語やった方がいいんじゃないと思われるけど。なんでかっていうと、だってさ、他の国とかさ、もうお隣中国、韓国はもう日本より全然英語の喋れる率高いし、もう英語ってもうね、世界の、まあ共通言語っていうかね、っていうのだし。で、それを考えると日本ってかなり、英語の、まあ教育っていうかね、もう遅れてて、まあそれは、もう、学んだ方がいいと思います。
My perspective is a little different. My perspective is, although I think there are many benefits you can learn from a language, if you don't have any interest to learn a language, you do not, and I would not even recommend that you learn a language. Because, yeah, for me, like, fundamentally, although there's, like you said, all these benefits, and maybe forcing yourself outside of something, your box, if you really want to force yourself outside of something, and it seems interesting to you, then go for it. There's so many benefits I think you can get. But I think, like, yeah, just on keeping it real, language learning is a huge feat, and aside from how many, like, polyglots can oversimplify it, and I feel like if you do not have a genuine reason, a genuine interest, it does not matter how many resources you throw about it. You are just, if you're doing it for some non-intrinsic reason, or unless you're, like I said, a hyperfixated neurotic person, which that can sometimes happens, or you were born a native speaker and you have some exposure, you basically have, you're doing an extremely Herculean task that's going to be, even more difficult. And for what real reason if you don't want to do it? That was kind of, I guess, I don't know. I mean, obviously the Language Learning Podcast, I do recommend it. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I definitely don't like this. I think a lot of virtue signaling that happens through language learning, especially like content around language learning. Like, oh, I remember seeing this video, and no hate to this video if you guys know what I'm talking about. It's like, I learned so many languages and now I can't communicate with people because I'm like, I just know so many different perspectives, and every time I talk to somebody, I'm like, they wouldn't understand. I just have all these different voices. I'm like, dude, just what are you? Just chill out. You didn't turn into this super special being who's so much better and can understand all the human beings. You just speak multiple languages, and that does give you multiple perspectives. But yeah, I feel like keeping some perspective as to why you're doing it, what your reasons are for it, and whether that really has any concrete benefit to you other than just being performative is something that I want to stress in this conversation. So let us know how you feel about polyglots. Are you a polyglot? And if you are, write us in. And thank you for you guys for listening for
100回目。
Yeah, 100th episode. We'll talk about that more. 戻りました。
We're back.
あいみはついにというか、昨日でしたっけ？おととい？結果の試験もらったってこと？
試験の結果ね。
うん。
4 or 5 days ago, I got the notification that I passed the final exam of this year. So finally, I can be yeah, a 6th year student. Actually, I was pretty nervous about this test. So because I didn't study that much, like compared to the amount I usually study. So I was pretty nervous. But it turned out I passed. So yeah. Congratulations to me.
一応できてよかった。おめでとう。パチパチパチパチパチ。6年生になる。6年生は最後の、1年でしょ。最後。で、6年生の後は何
？Resident. So like in the sixth year, we have two big exams. One is how do you say? Exam for to graduate. ね。And then if you pass that, you can take the national exam. So if you fail the graduation exam, then you can't take the national exam and you have to repeat the same year. So hope I will not fail that.
6年生はよく留年するの？ちなみに。
some people still
最低もう最後のところ。
And then like some people like repeat 留年 like for I don't know 5 years after graduating. Like some people like can pass the graduation exam, but then they fail the national exam, so like they go to cram school specific which is specific for the national exam. So they spend a lot of money going to that cram school, and then they do a lot of studying, but still some people keep failing for I don't know more than 5 years or something. So yeah, that's rough.
それはマジで想像できないぐらいなんでやってるのかと思うんだけど、まあそれ起こらないようにみんな優しいメッセージを送ってください。あいみできるよみたいなメッセージを待っています。また他のニュース、今週のニュースは今週アメリカに戻る。極まり残念
残念極まりない。何いつも逆なの？
まあ頭の中は面白い。わかんない。まあとりあえずまあ行きたくないというか、まあ行きたくない。アメリカにマジで行かなくちゃいけない。もちろんパスポートのいろいろあるから。でも一番恋しくなるものを少しだけリストを書きましたので、ここで紹介したいかなと思った。まずはいつも話してるんだけど、お風呂カフェ。めっちゃ恋しくなる。なんか今の時点で多分、どれぐらいかな ?8 回 ?9 回ぐらい行ってると思う。なんかめっちゃ、私の人生の一部になった。最後のなんか2週間前のポッドキャストでは早々のフリーレンの話をしたんだけど、早々のフリーレンを、なんか読む時間を見つけられたのは、お風呂カフェに行ったから、なんかだった。で、第2じゃなくて、まあ、リストの他の書いたことは、コスパ良い店。昨日、他の医学生がニューヨークに行く話があったの覚えてる？でもニューヨークに行って、なんか何を買った方がいいみたいな話になったんだけど、日本の視点からすると、アメリカはもちろんすごく高くて、アメリカに行くのは勧めできない。なんか普通のランチでも多分なんか4000円ぐらい ?5000 円ぐらい使うことになる。でも逆に私はなんか非常に安い全部に慣れてきたので、なんかアメリカに戻ると多分お金を使わないことになる。で、第3は電車の自由。私は今自由な鳥になったって気がする。なんかどこにも行けるって感じ。東京に行きたかったら電車に乗る。まあコンビニないんだけど、まあとりあえず他の近くにいる店に行きたかったら電車に乗る。でもアイドホに戻るとその自由が完全になくなるからほぼ何もできなくなる。すごく悲しい未来が待っている。でも日本に戻るけど今要約を作っている。感想はあるかな？何の感想？まあ、なんかこの私の逆ななんか状況、逆にアメリカに行きたいとか、日本から戻った時に、これは悔しかったなと。
まあ、
ないね。
I like American people more than Japanese people. Yeah. And I just wish that I could speak English more fluently. If I could speak English fluently, then I will not have any problems. But like, I had
Any problems ってどういうことだ
Problems?
人生の唯一の問題は英語
no
の問題ってこと
like there I had some problems like in New York. Yeah, not like being able to speak English that much. So yeah, I just wish I could speak more.
で、最後最後のセクションに入る前に、このポッドキャストは、まあ、100回だから、このエピソードはいつも通り、サムネも、もういつも通りの形で、詳細も、まあ、大体同じで、で、タイトルも大体同じ。でも、これからいろいろな変更というかを考えている。多分、サムネのデザインは変える。また、そのタイトルも変えるかもしれない。なんて言えばいいんだろうね。多分最初に Japanese listening とか、聞き流しを入れることになる。毎日じゃなくて毎週ポッドキャストを聞いているなら、lazyfluency の、なんていうか、サムネが出てきたら、でもこれはなんか lazyfluency に似てないなと思ったら、すみません。でも、SEO のために何か変えないといけないと思った。それだけ伝えたかった。多分後でもう少し話すと思うんだけど、多分 Twitter とかの SNS も頻繁に使えるようになりたいというか、まあ、どう？じゃあ。
めんどくさいけどね。
やらないといけないと思った。すみませんでした。And we're back with the final section. And if you made it to the final section, that means send an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com with a comment, question, language related, and or otherwise. And this week we have a new commenter with another commenter who also is, I guess, a more infrequent commenter. And also, obviously, our MVP commenters commented as well. Very fitting for our 100th episode. Our first comment is from Sad Baby Potato. Which as an Idahoan hurts me. Why is this potato sad? He says, this is regarding our Duolingo. I think Duolingo is very unsuitable for learning any Asian language. However, for European languages, it's not bad. Consistency and creating a habit of learning every day are very important for beginners. So the Green Owl does a great job in both. It's just you need to know when to stop and get other learning resources. A second comment related to Duolingo is from Waifu Not Needed.
Waifu is needed.
And the comment goes as follows. Personally, I think that is never the creators of the websites like the Moe Way or AGATT are the ones who promote the BS of just doing Anki cards or such. It's always the readers who make out what they understand of it. Many people in the community don't read jack and make what they want to hear out of that. This is the reason that even though I read the website of AGATT but don't follow the community, if you'll see the actual website, it's always good in logic and stuff with actual real value or motivation. But the community, not so much. Having said that, I used Duolingo for one day and realized all the stuff you mentioned myself. So glad I stopped that, even though it cost me my family. Also, congratulations on 500 subs, just my 2 yen.
2 yen のさ、言い方が、なんで2 yen なのって聞いたら、なんだっけ
It's just my 2 cents. And so it just means, 私の何でしたっけ個人的な意見ですが、みたいな。
just my opinion みたいな。
Yeah, just my opinion. Just change it to yen. I will say that the 2 yen is probably worth like -$4 at this point, so.
2 cents でしょ ?2 cents だといくらぐらいなんだろう
Yeah, I don't know how you could get it. Yeah, it's actually interesting. Exchange rates get really weird when you're dealing with pennies. You just can't. I don't think you would even like if you give 1 yen. If you gave me 1 yen, I would give you back not a penny, right? That's actually interesting. So I'm assuming there's a limit that you can exchange, because there's literally no amount of. If they give me 1 yen, I can't give them anything back. Like, how much can you give me for 1 yen? Japanese yen. I can give you 0. You have not. Equated my lowest amount of currency yet. What? That's all good. Anyways, in terms of the Duolingo, okay, I miss. In terms of Duolingo, I do agree with you. Well, first, I guess I'll talk about Sad Baby Potato because he was the first person who made a comment. About the consistency that Duolingo creates as well as the habit of learning, which I think are good. But the thing is, I don't think there's an easy way unless you have a very bad experience to shift away. And that's why, generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend Duolingo. I know you have a specific experience with Duolingo, so maybe this might be, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I've never tried.
And then secondly, although I agree with you that in theory, a lot of the, AG, I can't remember the acronym for AGATTD. It just has to do with immersion, basically, which is like not their unique concept, to be clear. I don't know why that's even treated like they made up some unique concept. The whole like immersion Japanese approach that's like been around for a while. Anyways, I will say that this is a comment that I would agree with, but I also believe this is one of those things where people say their audiences reflect the creators. And I do believe that one of the reasons you get hyper-paranoid people who feel they always need to do, all the Anki and that's the most effective way is because of the rhetoric and the way that people speak, especially the community, even in the pages, because I've read like at least, I don't know, most recently I don't follow them, but I've read, I think their website at one point. The way that they speak about language learning is in an extremely, especially one of those going like, this is, we need to actually quantify what it means to be fluent and make it into a bunch of different categories. This is optimal. I would clarify this is a 10 and this is not a 10. That speaking and just creates extreme paranoia and unnecessary. It's just not a healthy metric for anybody. I literally don't understand a single benefit of that. Like the thing is, we can more properly assess your abilities. But who are you assessing? You're not a professor. You're not even a graduate. So like, what are you even talking about? But anyways, Aimi doesn't have any, familiarity with these groups, which is why I don't think she has any 2 yen on the subject. But yeah, thank you for the comments. Oddity and Shawcox also had comments about Duolingo, but Shawcox, you had the longest comment I think you've had in the history of the podcast. Thank you for doing that on episode 100.
100回目の記念ですごい。
Yeah, over 1,000 words. What I think, obviously you're on YouTube, your comments on YouTube, and Oddity actually had a really great comment that I want to get to, and I'll put her full comment on here. But I think one of the most lazy fluency ways we can end this episode is with a response from Oddity to Shawcox and then one from Shawcox back, as the people who we really appreciate of every episode or very close to it, commenting and contributing. The show would be very, very different if you guys were not doing that. So, yeah, really appreciate that. And so what other way to end the episode, which has kind of been a mess, with a response from Oddity. I'll put her full comment because she has a bunch of great stuff, but I'm reading the direct response to Shawcox from last episode. Shawcox basically was talking about operationalizing happiness into a bunch of small concrete tasks. And this is Oddity's response. First, I must comment on Shawcox's previous comment, and in doing so, I will allow myself some philosophical snooty babble. His operationalization of happiness is a true testament to the American school of analytical philosophy. Maximum quantization. Dewey would be proud. It reminded me of one of my favorite definitions of happiness from one of Thomas Hobbes. I'll spare the actual quote because it's annoying to read in old English, which states that happiness is basically getting what you want at a very high frequency. I'm especially fond of it because it reads very pessimistic and misanthropic. Most philosophers are all holistic, this and metaphysical that, and Hobbes is like, yeah, fuck that. As long as you can fulfill your selfish desires, you are happy. And Shawcox's response to this, which is I find is very funny, and is Shawcox was more so, I think, speaking about what he wanted to be, because he said his actual resolutions are as follows. I do want to say, I do kind of fall towards Oddity on the resolution front. I don't actually have a New Year's resolution either. I think we should just start stuff whenever. My last few resolutions have been to lie more, be more vain, and this year it's to be more insufferable. With that being said, I do have some goals I'm working on this year. The 2 big ones are to really hit Spanish. I have issues with finding good motivation for it, so I signed up for a college Spanish class to kind of force me to work at it. I'm lucky that I get them for free though through my work, so I have the luxury to just pop one on. I might just accidentally slip and fall into another goal. There was another part about Shawcox's comment, which can direct, I think Aimi can also speak on, which was the idea of booking a flight, basically forcing yourself to do some, buying a ticket, getting yourself to go inside an event so that you have to actually commit yourself and do it. One example, I guess, Shawcox was directly asking me if I had any advice for how to force himself to find more Japanese practice. And my thoughts immediately, I have one. I'm going to hear your opinion because I've been talking this whole time. My apologies. People want more Japanese. is to sign up for a speech contest. Not because I believe speech contests are like necessarily like natural language conversational Japanese, but it'll definitely force you to feel like you have to, get on some language exchange apps. Maybe force you to feel like you have to get a tutor. And so I think signing up for a contest, a speech contest specifically, could definitely be your version of booking a flight. Do you have any opinions on speech contest? 弁論大会?
弁論大会ってすごい、あれだね。レベル高いとこ行ったね。これね、諸国のためのってこと
Yes.
一般的に in general ってこと
Well, just in general, have you ever
いや、ス
done
ピーチコンテストし2回ぐらいやったけど。まあ。
What are your opinions? Wait, how was that? I've never actually heard of this before.
ちなみに2位取ったよ、その時。で、なんだっけな。なんでスピーチコンテストをそもそも、なんだっけ、recommend するの
He's looking for a way to force himself to get more Japanese listening, or I think speaking specifically.
でもスピーチコンテストはどちらかというと、人前で出て喋るのを訓練するためにはすごくいいプラクティスだと思うよ。だから例えばさ、なんだろう。まあ、将来さ、なんだろう。会社で、なんかすごい何千人もの前で喋んないといけない、イベントがあるから、その前に、ちょっとした人数でやりたいっていう時に、こういうなんかスピーチコンテスト、なんとかコンテスト出て、人前で喋る訓練をするみたいな。そういうのには、スピーチコンテストはいいと思うけど、でもなんだろう、その喋るフリクエンシーを、上げたいっていうんだったら別にスピーチコンテストは適してるとは言えないと思うか。
No, the goal is he has to have some reason that is not under his control to force himself to practice Japanese. And he said explicitly that going to Japan is not an option.
まあね、まあだから、例えばさ、諸国数どこ住んでんだっけどこ住んでか忘れたけど、なんか近くとか、まあ住んでるとことか、まあ行ける範囲で、なんかジャパニーズの、なんかグループコミュニティとかあったら、そこで、なんか毎週行くとか、なんか、そうすれば絶対喋るじゃん。
I think you're missing the point. Something has to force him to do it. That's the point.
だからそうじゃん。
No. I'm saying, okay. He's looking for something that's like, if he doesn't go, he's suffering a consequence and disappointing many people. I guess he could become a leader of a group or something, of a Japanese group. But if you're just a Japanese group and just a member, you can just miss him practice. What I'm saying, if you're going to a speech contest, and as someone who, I don't think I've told this story, so maybe I'll tell this story because we're talking about speaking and bad experiences and like learning journeys. This is, I don't think I've ever mentioned this on the podcast, but it's probably one of the most, for me, I don't know, not really a positive experience, but it's an experience I'm happy I had. Which is I had to do a speech when I was studying abroad in Japan. I ended up becoming like the elected representative of like my class, which is cool. But there was a speech that he had to do in front of a bunch of Japanese parents for everybody who was there. And for me, I would not say this is something that like I was wanting to stick myself out, and it might be funny that I'm recommending this because it ended up being so traumatic for me. Because for me personally, I learned, and I don't think it was related to the speech. It's just that I learned that I'm somebody who is much better doing speeches from with small note cards. I think we talked about it before, just like a few words, as opposed to memorizing it. Because when I memorize speeches, I literally stop thinking, and if I forget a word or phrase, then my brain turns off. But that's what ended up happening, and I just stood in front of a crowd for about like 30 or 40 seconds saying absolutely nothing, and I froze. And even in thinking about it in front of all the Japanese parents, and as one of the most traumatic experiences in my Japanese learning goal. But one of the professor who was leading the program, like an American who's lived in Japan like 30 plus years, said that this actually something like that happened to them, and it's very common to do that. But I will say, I'm not wanting you to experience that, but what I will say is that fear, well, at the very least, regardless of how the speech goes, regardless of how any speech goes, will force you to be like, oh shit, I cannot be missing. I have to, get the daily conversations in. I have to, jump on a language learning app, start messaging people, say, hey, I need to talk. I need to get a tutor to maybe help me figure out how to set up a speech. Your fear of avoiding failing and feeling the pain, regardless if you end up being like me and feeling all this, feeling the most embarrassing moments in your entire life, you'll still, what's the expression? You shoot for the moon, land in the stars. In my case, I fell into the stars and broke my legs, but I still was in the stars. And I feel like if you're looking away not to go to Japan, that's probably one of your best way to do it.
オンラインレッスンとかいいんじゃない？オンラインジャパニーズレッスンとかさ、その先生をもうなんか regularly にとって、もう if you don't show up だったら you just lose money だからさ。じゃごめん、英語で喋ってた。お金払うからさ、そのお金を何もしないで失いたくないっていう、恐怖だよ。それと、なんだ、自分で決めたね、フリクエンシーで、その先生と、話すっていうのを決めればさ、それもいいんじゃない？
Well, my thing is money, and I thought about that initially. I actually wrote that down. Like, you can, get a tutor. But I have people I've tutored who are just totally fine with week after week being like, nah, this week, not this week. Here, take some money. I'm sorry for last minute cancellations and stuff like that. No. I think the goal you're trying to create is one that will cripple you if you don't prepare for it. I think he used an example of you had to prepare I can't remember. He gave an example of somebody who had to prepare an entire orchestral piece. And the person did it the night of because they procrastinated. So I'm feeling if you're looking for that kind of stakes, find a speech competition. Because I can tell you, I've had I felt physical pain in a lot of different ways. I felt mental exhaustion in a lot of different ways. I have never felt more embarrassed than that. And also, it wasn't from under practicing. It was actually from over practicing and just not realizing my stress.
全部丸覚えしてさ、原稿を作っちゃうとさ、それで1ラインさ、思い出せなかっただけでさ、そのまま全部ぶっ飛んじゃうからさ、マジで、プレゼンするときはマジでそれやめた方がいいっていうのを言われて、私、帰国じゃねえ。留学して帰国の報告会みたいなのあったのね、で、それで、ほぼ原稿を作ってないくて、めちゃめちゃ聞くやすかったよとか言われて、やっぱり原稿は作んない方がいいんだと思って。うん。
I definitely met people who couldn't roll with it. I just think I learned that for me it doesn't work. I'd never done all my other speeches in my life have gone fantastic with very simple, note card presentation.
Bullet points だけとかね。
Yep. And this is the first time I was like, oh, the stakes are high, so I'm going to verbatim memorize everything. Terrible idea. But I'm glad I experienced it, is what I would tell myself. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to us, especially if you listened from the first episode. Especially thanks to Shockox and Oddity. The podcast would be a very different beast without you guys.
Without you guys. ね、ここまで来てなかったね。just not Shockox と、Oddity だけじゃないけど、他の今までコメントしてくれた、一回でもコメントしてくれた人たちは、最後のセクションの、コンテンツになってきたからね。ありがとうございます。
Just so, I think you guys probably already know this. We're not the hugest channel or even close to one of the bigger podcasts. But if you're concerned about monetary incentives, don't be. We have not made a single penny on any podcast or main channel episode. Not even a single penny. We are in the red by hundreds of dollars. And it's not even close. So the real thing that makes you motivated is I really like the communication. So if you're somebody who hasn't commented before, I recommend that you do so. We really appreciate it, and that's what really makes it fun. So yeah, thank you so much. And like I said, I will be changing some stuff up, seeing if we can get more people introduced to the podcast, actually doing some more SEO stuff, but not this week because I have a bunch of stuff and it's my last week in Japan. And yeah. Also, main channel video. I will be in America, and when I'm in America, my goal is I'm gonna have 10 days, and I will get the main channel video done those 10 days. You guys will just make fun of me. Send me comments saying, "Joey, you're an idiot." If it's January 31st and there's not a video out, I want comments disparaging me. Okay, that's all. We will hopefully make another 100 more. We will see. That bell means we reached the end of today's episode. Thanks for joining us in another lazy conversation towards fluency. If you have any language-related questions and are just looking for general advice, send an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com and we might respond in the next episode. Also, make sure to check out our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and more. We'd appreciate the support. This has been Joey.
Then I Yami.
Signing off. Jane.